Hi everyone, I'm Clinton Harn, your host for 60 Seconds on Set. Today we're here at Rode HQ and we have a very special guest, a man that needs no introduction and has lensed TV programs such as 24, Dallas, Shameless, Nashville and many more. As an accomplished and veteran DP with many years under his belt, he's part of a new movement of experienced cinematographers that is now embracing new technology and is also an advocate for sharing and educating his filmmaking philosophies. We're very privileged to have him here today, introducing Mr. Rodney Charters, ASC CSC and NZCS. Rodney, thanks so much for being here. I guess, I want to ask you a couple of questions. Tell us a bit about
Well, I grew up in a photographer's family in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And my father shot 16mm, he had a Bolex, and I used it to make my first film. The film got me into the Royal College of Art in London, and I went there for almost 4 years and worked in London for a while. But then after got into documentaries and did about 20 years of documentary shooting, mostly out of Toronto and Canada. Okay. So my background was 16mm, Arton, Eclair, Arri, SR2s and then 3s in the drama that was being shot in Toronto. I segued into drama, and then as I moved to the States, the shows became more predominantly 35mm. And shows like 24 were shot entirely on film. And at the end of 24, 2009-10, there was the transition to digital. We fought it while we were on 24, and I'm glad we did. There was a certain quality that you got out of high-speed film that was pushed a little bit, and we embraced the grain, and we embraced the sodium lighting and the qualities that gave that show a rough edge. And then since that time, I worked a season with Red MX chip, and then segued over to the Alexa, and I suppose I've done some 6,000 hours on set with Alexas now. So I would say that was predominantly my main camera, recording to ProRes 444, and experimenting with various alternate ways to diminish the garish and harsh qualities of modern lenses and the chip imaging that takes place in an electronic format. It's not gracious, it's not organic like film, and when you're confronted with older women who are your stars, you have to do a lot of trickery to kind of reduce that. And you bring up one thing is, of course, our friends at Tiffin. Yep. Hollywood Glimmer Glass has been my great friend to take the edge off a set of Angenoux zooms. I predominantly use a 15-40, 28-76 and the 45-120 short zooms. They're very expensive, but they're comfortably handheld, so shows like Shameless and so on that were extensively, almost entirely handheld, we could use those well. I love the fact that they've come out now with a new set of glass, which you can find online, and I'm a particular fan now of Black Satin.
Black Satin.
It's a combination of some of the glimmer and other diffusions, and I find that very satisfying. Also, I've very happily managed to buy in China recently a set of old Contax glass. What changed with the lensing was several things, computer-generated analysis and so on, but also the fact that the European Union forbade people to use lead in glass and other rare earths that gave the older glass a much more warm kind of quality. It wasn't necessarily as sharp, but it somehow you weren't preoccupied by the flaws in people's faces. So between the filters and using older glass, I personally like the old 25-year-old HR Angenoux 25-250. I'm not impressed with the new lenses, and so part of my whole approach to this was that from an early age in computing, when I saw changes beginning to happen with Photoshop and so on, and new ways of doing compositing, with After Effects, and then the 5D came along, we embraced it immediately, and we started using it for all our plate shots, moving vehicles where we would play back the resulting files on a high-def projector beside the car to do all of our moving helicopter plates or whatever. And the venerable Canon 5D has done a remarkable job. However, what's really, really cool about coming to Australia, sitting here, and one of the, I think Rode won the Manufacturer of the Year award this year for innovation and excellence in manufacturing. It's quite brilliant, but there are two other companies also in Australia that are breaking new ground. One of them are these guys, Adamus.
Yeah.
And this device, I think, is going to be a major game changer for a tremendous number of filmmakers around the world, because this, added to this, gives you ProRes files. And I've had people tell me that networks will refuse to let you use certain cameras unless they shoot ProRes. ProRes is the de facto standard. We just got a new increase. I think it goes up to some 560 meg per second now with the XQ, I think it's called. This does not do XQ, but this does a very competent 422. And it also do the lower resolutions if you choose to go that way. And the whole thing can fit in the palm of your hand. I'm excited because I know that there's going to be a 4K version of this in the near future, which will match with the Sonys and so on, the new Alpha camera, and gives you so much more quality and ease of editorial. And then, of course, you know, there's Rode themselves who come out with fantastic products. We're using a little body mic here, a little lav, smart lav. Beautiful quality audio, relatively cheap. You have to be able to buy this, and it mates with the iPhone, a piece of software that will run this. You can lock it, you can set all kind of parameters, and you get beautiful audio and double system sync. It synchronizes with all three of these cameras perfectly. And this is just amazing when I think back, because I started, and when I did sound for a series of years with an old Stellavox stereo head device. And some of my first jobs were with a Selson interlock, where there was a cable going through a motor that drove the camera between the sound device and the camera. It was really old style.
And you mentioned something about you, you know, trying to maybe even shrink your productions a bit more and, you know, shoot light. And that's, it's incredibly refreshing hearing that coming from you.
Well, there are two things going on. One of them, of course, is the wedding photographers are only too happy to tell you that these cameras now make wedding professionals almost obsolete. In that anybody can show up, and there may be 20 people at the wedding that have a better camera than the photographer who's officially assigned to shoot the wedding. The same thing is happening now to motion picture, and that you can be shooting and doing a documentary on a 5D, and someone's going to come along with a C300, which is not that much more money, and suddenly you're like, oh, wow, this is pretty cool. Which
can I mention you shot with the C300 on Oxfam with
Keira Knightley? Yes, I had.
Tell us a bit about that.
I had a fascinating friend of ours, Dan Chung, who's a correspondent in Beijing in China for the MSNBC. He couldn't do the job, and Oxfam had reached out to him. He's a Brit who's for many years he was photographer of the year, still photographer in London for many years, worked. And he said, look, Oxfam have asked me to do this thing, and you'd be perfect for it. I said, what is it? They said, well, they want someone to go to South Sudan. I said, wait a minute, that's a conflict zone. There's a war going on there. This sounds terrible. But for the longest time, I couldn't say who I was going with. But now that it's all out, they said, well, Keira Knightley, we want someone to photograph her and go. And I thought, wow, if she's brave enough to go, who am I? So I got all the jabs and for malaria and cholera and everything else. And we took off, and we spent a week, 2.5 days in a UN conflict camp. And that was an extraordinary experience. And she was just wonderful and lovely, as beautiful as you can imagine. It's really easy to photograph, very easy to liaise with, and trying to be quiet while interviewing people who's lost their husbands, who lost their children, due to famine and impending disease, because they have nothing and their crops are unable to be planted. So there's a real crisis developing there. And I'm glad to say that Oxfam are very pleased with the results and the coverage, and they raised a lot of money for food for South Sudan.
Terrific.
I thought about it for a long time. I thought about taking in a mirror. I could have taken it, but I was worried about the batteries and how I would fare with that. And it's a much heavier device. And I ended up with the C300. But Canon were very lovingly gave me converted to the new automatic focus. And Zacuto, Steve Weiss, it was nice to be in this position, FedExed me a kit which put the camera back quite nicely here with the old Sony mount. And I had a Miller tripod. I took a DS20 and the carbon fiber legs. It was fantastic. So it was a relatively heavy body camera, but at least the head, other people helped to carry it, so that was good. And I had the remote grip with the C300 with a touch focus, so that any time I panned around, I could touch it and just confirm focus. It would automatically focus. And that's a ridiculously powerful tool for documentary work. Generous battery life, great on the double card system. You can shoot for a couple of hours. you know, and the battery lasts like 4 or 5 hours that I was using. So it's a great camera for field shooting compared to my old days where 16 SR, you'd be 10-minute rolls. I had 3 that I would preload, and then I'd have to go in a changing bag and change them. And so 30 minutes of filming, and that was it. You had to be very judicious. Whereas with double system and a sound man, basically we would roll through big chunks of dialogue that was happening, and either you just point the camera at the ground, you move into a new position, and you pick it up again. You don't cut because sync's maintained. It just makes it a lot easier to shoot a longer form documentary.
You almost assume that sort of run and gun role after doing so many years of drama, and so obviously going to South Sudan and shooting by yourself. By the way,
back to it. Yeah, I had no assistants.
You had no assistants.
There were just 2 of us.
Yeah.
So I was rusty, I have to say.
And you know, for the record, I actually knew that you were going before you did.
Oh, you did, really?
Because Dan actually said. So I said that would be very exciting for Rodney once he finds out.
No, it was a tremendous experience. I like going and exploring the planet. Always expose yourself to new thinking, new ideas, new people, different races of people, different language. Yeah. And one of the things I did in China before I left, I did an on-camera in Mandarin, which was very challenging.
Yeah. Look, I have to say, when talking about people, I mean, you know, you seem to be incredibly generous also with your knowledge. I mean,
well, I think it's crazy if you have this knowledge not to share it. There are people who are. I certainly felt that was true in China when I met young cameramen there. Yeah. They were just so thirsty, and they had no idea, watched 24 intimately, but didn't have an understanding of how we blocked and how we achieved the kinds of moves that we did they evolved over time to be a method which most cinematographers will use now, shooting drama, where you're required to do 10, 12 pages a day on some occasions. That's a lot of shooting. And there are efficiencies that are gained by the fact that we're now working at 1-foot candle to 5-foot candles, that a Kino like this is a very powerful light, ridiculously. And I can take the 1x1 light panels and take them down to almost nothing and work in the dark, literally, where the actors will come to me and say, "Are you really lit out there?" I say, "Yes, I'm lit. The reason we're working so dark is because all the ND on these windows is not allowing me to see the city lights of Dallas, and the shot calls for that. I want to see those lights, so I'm having to work at 270 shutter, wide open shutter essentially. I'm at 2.8 on the lens or 2.6, and I've gone up to 1600 ISO on the camera because it's a relatively noiseless chip. And this new Sony is reported to be able to go to 25,000 ISO. Yeah. So what does that open up? The possibilities. And I remember when I was young, my first piece of technology I bought because they're trying to eradicate possums in New Zealand. So you could go out and shoot them at night with a flashlight on your head, a little lead acid battery in your pocket, at 22s. And I would go out in the moonlight, and during the winter you'd see snow on the mountain. You'd see this spectacular image, and you'd say, I wonder what it would take to photograph that, because you do it with time lapse. Yeah. But these cameras now, I think Canon have already demonstrated that with the 1DC, but this particular Sony may be even more light hungry. Yeah. Allow you to go out at night and shoot in mountains where you can see the mountain, you can see the snow, you can see the trees. How extraordinary that is to be able to shoot under those conditions. The
base ISO for the A7S is like 3200 in S-log.
Yes. Yeah, so. That of course is also a challenge because you're always going to need ND.
NDs, yeah.
And NDs, the failure of the NDs to perfectly work, the only NDs that have been any good are the ones in the Amira, which I don't know where they're made, but they are demonstratively flat, whereas Tiffins and Snyder's go up and down with their waveform. And I have terrible time when I have 2 cameras up or 3 cameras. I ask them to put an ND 21 in, and there's a difference between the cameras suddenly because it's very, very difficult to make those deposits accurately.
Yeah, well, I think with various brands of NDs, it depends on the sensor as well. I think some NDs tend to be more, attuned to certain sensors.
Yes. With
different cameras, and I found that the Tiffins work across quite a good range of cameras as well.
Well, the nature of making a sensor is you make 100 of them and then you test them all and choose the best.
Yes, correct.
And I suspect there will be variations between those, but I always have matched cameras until I put an IR filter on. And I'm like, oh, please, this could be better. Yeah, but anyhow, it's easily tweaked by the lovely product now from Blackmagic, Resolve.
Yeah.
And actually, interestingly, in the case of this little doco thing I did for Oxfam, I shot log C I delivered it to them, and at the end of the cut they said, oh, we're going to put it to air like that. I said, no, wait a minute, someone has to color pass on this. And they said, well, we can't afford to. I said, okay, send it to me. So they uploaded. It was only 2 minutes long, and there were two 30-second promos. And they uploaded it to me, and I was able to work on the kitchen table of my brothers to finish the color pass and upload it to them. If you were a still photographer, the thing you did was you went in the darkroom. 50% of your finished print was taking the photo.
Yeah.
The second of it was printing it, dodging, burning. You know, I only did it in black and white, but it was true of color. The fact that you can go into your motion picture files and hold back an area or track a face. For many years dealt with a black president and Kiefer Sutherland, or some quite white Caucasian woman's face. And the contrast between them really maximized the ability of film. But now it's possible to lift the face on the black actor or take down the face on the white actor just by tracking it. And you can do it, as I say, on your kitchen table with a powerful laptop. You don't even need a big tower, and you let it chug away. To have those controls, you ignore your ability to really produce a perfect image by not having those controls at your fingertips. And yes, you can get colorists to do it, but often part of what you do when you're lighting is you make suggestions to yourself by playing with the files and saying, you know what, if we shoot this at 10,000 Kelvin, it's much more appealing, and you run it by the director, and the director agrees, and then you're halfway towards having a fairly effortless time in grading, because grading can be quite expensive and nobody wants to spend a lot of time there. And a lot of friends of mine have said now, because of these tools on set, the grading is seamless and very efficient, and producers love to be very efficient. Yeah. I mean, that's what this is all about, and using less lights. Like, I don't have 18Ks anymore, I don't have 6Ks, I don't have 12Ks, I have 4Ks, and I have a bunch of 1800 Arris. And those are my go-to HMIs, and then everything else is battery-operated 1x1s, small LED focusing Fresnels. I don't use any of the tungsten lights in the 100s, 200s, 400s, 500s. I've occasionally used a 20K just because it was lying around, but those are very expensive lights. And not only that, they need an enormous amount of power generated by a generator. So twin 1700 amp generators that used to be on our tractor trailer are not there anymore. And we can put that money on the screen in some other way.
And your little trade secret with the 1K pars, tell us about that.
Oh, well, yes. I mean, the way I found out about this is once we went to digital, the studio lot guys just put up 18Ks or 20K pars. They were wide Fresnels in 20K and tungsten on the stage sets, 3 sets of houses, 4 windows each, so we had 12 of them, and it was a very expensive rental, and I didn't need all that light, and so we went down finally to 1K pars, and we did 2 of them crossed, could use one or the other. It was a quick changeover, and I got the same amount of beautiful sunlight because at the levels that we were working. Base ISO of the Alexa at 800 is substantially more than most other cameras. There's shadow detail and highlight control in spades, and so the 1K pars were fine. We gave back all those big lights, the chain hoist motors, the rock and roll truss. It came to $10,000 a week, and I was able to put that money towards the Alexa and to other things that production designer wanted. We made some changes, and producers love that. And I suspect that I could go out with a Sprinter van with a bunch of Kinoflows and 1x1 panels and like 4 1800 HMI.
And is that the future?
It's definitely the future. And I think, yes, there are times when you have a vast fantasy set that you need massive lighting for. But most of the time you can get away with augmented reality lighting. Like if you're on the street, we shot in London recently and they had really no money at all. I shot an anamorphic 4x3 with a bunch of Panavision anamorphic lenses, type G and type C. Beautiful, beautiful old-fashioned glass. Gorgeous, gorgeous. We shot available light on the streets of London. Each house that we shot outside of had 2 sodium lights. They were up about 25 feet. They were 50 feet apart, and they lit the house perfectly. And I added a 1x1 occasionally just to augment, but the rest of the time, that was it. We just shot. What one tends to do when you're putting up lights and you've got a team helping you is you put up too many of them.
Yes.
And so one thing you should do before you roll a camera is stop and reflect and just say, do I need that light? Could I switch that off? Let's just somebody switch it off. Okay, switch it off. No, I don't really need that. You know, now let's switch this off. And then you get down to a kind of a minimalist approach where quite often it has more viability as a statement. Otherwise, it's just, you can overlight so easily now, especially when you're dealing with practicals that actually are providing relevant light. Well, let's put a squeeze on that and dim it down till it's almost off. Oh, let's switch it off and see, you know. I think that's a great way to approach lighting. Yes, light, you're very happy with the light, and then say, wait a minute, let's see what I can switch off.
On a parting note, you mentioned something about content being king. I mean, we were just joking about
I'm getting to that point.
Yeah.
There are only two things that matter. They are the cast, the performance, and the script.
Yeah.
It's first the script and then the cast.
Yeah.
And if you don't write the script and make it work on paper and you don't cast it well, you're not going to make a movie.
Okay, so what would be your parting note or advice for aspiring filmmakers?
Find a good screenwriter if you can't write.
Terrific.
And work with somebody, if you want to be a cinematographer, find someone who seems to exhibit the talent to elicit great performance from people who may not necessarily be actors. Yeah. There's a real good gift in getting people to give you performance even though they've never done it before. There's a lot of films, classic films like that, and the film that I came away from the Oscars this year with has inspired me was Dallas Buyers Club, which was one Alexa, two lenses, one 5x6 monitor on the back of the camera that the director stood behind the cameraman. The operator was the DP. They didn't use any lights, or if they did, they were small 1x1s and so on, a little bit of augmentation. And they won an Oscar for McConaughey, they won an Oscar for Best Supporting, and they won for Best Makeup. They were nominated in all categories pretty well, and I think that's an amazing achievement. And when you think of it like that, with a star of that capacity, anything is possible. You know, this camera does a great job, these guys all do great jobs, and if you have a good story and good performance, and let's say McConaughey won because it was a spectacular performance and the script was brilliant. A young filmmaker out of Montreal, Canada, beautiful, beautiful piece of work in getting that performance.
Terrific.
And it was a great story, and it was a true story. So there's no shortage of stories out there.
Yeah.
The stories need telling, and they have an international appeal, an international audience. And I love the fact that Hollywood doesn't own this anymore. That yes, England had, and we have Nigeria with all its movies, and we have India, and we have China now made 700 movies last year. It's wonderful that people can Skype themselves, could go around the world and share this information, and I think we're going to have a whole pile of new filmmaking coming out of countries that you wouldn't have thought filmmaking would come from.
I mean, it's amazing because we're actually talking to Dan in the car as we were driving here, and we're just talking about how small the world's become based on this globalization, being able to communicate. Anyway, Rodney, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
It's been a privilege.
Pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
And buy motorcycles from this wonderful company here in Sydney.
Terrific. Thanks, guys.